Hi, it's your host Alona Kotz here. And when I was 8 years old, my dad and stepmother got engaged. They had had a few conversations and then they went and picked out a ring together. Perfectly romantic in my book today. This did not, however, satisfy an overly imaginative 8-year-old whose head was filled with Arthurian legends of kings, queens, knights and dragons. Instead, I insisted that the ring be hidden somewhere in the house and that my dad go on a quest to find it. Then, and only then, could he get down on one knee and propose to her, like a real Sir Galahad. Even at 8 years old, I understood that proposals, and by extension relationships, were supposed to have an epic, mythic quality to them. I had the script ready to go. A conversation and then picking the ring out together. Where was the drama? Where was the passion? Where was the test of love for the boy? How was a girl meant to feel unique and special without it? Where was the story? Obviously, my 8-year-old brain had already internalized a specific narrative from the world around me about what true love was supposed to look like. Romance had a pattern with clearly defined roles. And it felt so fundamental that I, a small child, felt the need to correct the grown-ups in their blatant, glaring error. This episode, I want to explore this script because I think it reveals something deep about the way we approach romance, as well as shed some light on why this version of love is so hard to give up, and what the hidden dangers lurking on its path may be. Welcome to Tying Knots, the podcast that takes a critical look at love and marriage so you don't have to. This is episode 2, which I'm calling The Script. Firstly, let's start by unpacking that script a little, the one 8-year-old Illy felt so strongly about. To create the magic of romance, it seems, there are always two roles. In this case, a proposer and a proposee.
Hi.
Hi. The proposer initiates the process.
So, would you like to be my wife?
The proposer must be tested as part of the process. Well, I would, but like the dragon. Measures of success are the size of the test and their willingness to do it.
Oh, yeah. That dragon's like massive. It's gonna take ages.
What was that?
Nothing. Leave this to me. Don't move.
And then, if the test is completed successfully, the proposee accepts or declines the offer. But definitely accepts, otherwise that wouldn't make for a very good story now, would it?
I'm back.
Oh, hi again.
I killed that dragon. It was pretty big, but I'm pretty strong. I'm not sure if you noticed.
Thanks.
You want to Chaucer and chill back at mine?
Yeah, sure. Worthiness is emphasized on both sides of this exchange. The proposer has to prove they are worthy through heroic deeds, while the magnitude of the heroic deeds reflects the proposee's worth. In other words, what someone is willing to endure for their sake. Unfortunately, as we all know, all the real dragons perished long ago due to rising sea levels. So what does this script look like in the real world? To help illustrate this next part, we need look no further than a reality tour de force, The Guiltiest of Pleasures, Selling Sunsets on Netflix. For those unfamiliar, the show follows a cast of successful real estate agents, all women, as they navigate the ups and downs of relationships in the LA housing market. And, let's be honest, mainly complain about the antics of their polarizing friend Christine. I mean, I'm not complaining, but without Christine, what would they even talk about? So, when it comes to engagements in the real world, I would argue, the size of the test and the proof of willingness is measured in 3 ways. The first being the expense, quality or sentimentality of the ring, e.g., is it a family heirloom? How many months' salary did they spend on it, etc. In this scene from season 1, Mary is announcing her engagement to the office. While everyone is supportive, it is clear that certain expectations have not been met.
me up and just made me coffee and was just saying how much he loved me and that, he wants to spend the rest of his life with me. And he proposed. He said it's moissanite, so it's not like a real diamond right now, but he's going to save up for it. He wants to show like how he wants to be with me, and then he's going to give me the ring that I deserve when he can do it.
Moissanite? Moistenite? Maybe it's like moist? Moissanite is naturally occurring silicon carbide, poly, God knows what, and it's a rare mineral. Okay, so it's a mineral.
How do you feel about the ring being moissanite or not a real diamond per se?
Divina.
I was a little shocked that it's fake. I would rather have a real ring. Me personally, I think most of the girls probably feel the same way. I think even Mary feels that same way. But if she likes it, that's fine.
Going by Davina's reaction, it's as if Mary's fiancé had handed her a piece of costume jewellery, or the squishy kind from a packet of Haribo. But regardless, we can also hear Mary's hesitant need to explain at the beginning, which seems justified given the immediate judgment and concern from her peers. A quick Google will show the same sentiment reflected in the media, who also described the first engagement ring as faux or fake, and when Mary's fiancé later rectifies the situation, they report it as welcome news, saying Mary gleefully boasted the romantic gesture on her Instagram. So a link is clearly being drawn between the price or quality of the ring and the level of perceived romance. The second measure of success is the quality of the proposal, how personal it is, the location, the performance, etc. In this scene over dinner, another cast member, Chrishell, is asked to recount her own engagement story.
Chrishell, tell us about your engagement.
Basically, we were traveling everywhere. I thought I was going to do it at each place, and he ended up doing it in the kitchen. So I was totally thrown off guard.
We can hear how an expectant Chrishell was strung along as each engagement-appropriate destination came and went. The word kitchen, said in a slightly disparaging tone, suggests it wasn't her first choice, nor expects it to be anyone else's. However, in this case, location was sacrificed in the name of the final measure of success, the desirable element of surprise. Here's Mary again.
Oh my God! Yeah. This is not my first engagement, but this one is different. The others, we planned it together, and it wasn't a surprise. And this one was a total shock, and it's with the right person.
You can hear there's something about the proposal being a surprise that feeds into Mary's narrative that this time it is right, that this time it really is true love. The surprise proposal is particularly ideal when the proposer has come up with the idea spontaneously and planned it of their own accord, doing an amazing job of highlighting both the proposee's lack of involvement or need for a proposal and the authenticity of the proposer's love at the same time. Completing these three elements successfully, quality of ring, quality of proposal, and surprise, helps to make satisfying and establish the all-important engagement story. The one, as we discussed in the last episode, that you'll be telling over and over again to relatives, friends, and strangers on planes for years to come. No pressure. Now, as the proposee, I'll admit this whole process can deliver quite a flattering high. Receiving this special attention can feel intoxicating, even powerful. I mean, it's a great compliment. Even my 8-year-old self knew that. The proposer has to run around dodging fireballs in your honour while you can just sit back and relax and catch up on the latest tapestries. Your only role is to pass the ultimate judgment after all, to accept or decline at the end. In real-world terms, it's your partner, not you, who has to prove their love by spending money, time and effort organising and executing the whole thing, while you, hopefully, are none the wiser. The problem with this blueprint is that it teaches us that the act of romance is inherently split into two roles, an active role and a passive role, a chooser and a chosen. It will come as a surprise to precisely no one that our society, of course, codes the choosers male or masculine, and the chosen female or feminine. Men are socialized to initiate and plan, like deciding on first date or Valentine's activities, buying gifts, or making the first move, while women are socialized to react, for example, accepting or declining a date, a kiss, or an offer to walk them home. Revisiting Lamont's 2014 study Negotiating Courtship from episode 1, many women, she suggests, actually experience a catharsis from this social patterning of desire. Passivity in these situations, after all, not only provides assurance that someone is into you, but also protects you from potential rejections. Let's be honest, putting yourself out there is hard and scary, especially when we receive a lot of messaging that doing so might make us less attractive, appearing too loose or too much. Alternatively, passivity in formal dating can be used to screen out guys just looking for a casual hookup from those genuinely interested in a committed relationship, as well as be a measure of his character in general. In the same study, for example, planning and paying for dates were often perceived as signs of respect and as acts of chivalry. Now, chivalry is a very interesting thing for 21st century women to be seeking in a partner, not least because chivalry is a literary idea that captured the hearts and minds of Europe's bookworms over 800 years ago. Chivalrous or courtly love, also known as heroic love, began to be practiced in French courts in the 11th century, eventually making its way into countless romance stories. Its narrative pattern went something like this. The lover, or idolizer, typically a knight, tries to make himself worthy to his mistress by acting bravely and honourably, and by doing whatever deeds she might desire, subjecting himself to a series of tests or ordeals to prove to her his ardour and commitment. While based on sexual attraction, sexual satisfaction may not be the goal, or even the result. It is a love at once passionate but chaste, a noble devotion expressed through acts of service. It's all sounding very familiar, isn't it? Without having the language to express it, I think this was what my 8-year-old self in my quest for romance was grasping at, and what the women in the study, consciously or unconsciously, were referring to, which means this medieval concept of heroic love, translated for a modern context, is somehow still acting as a guidepost for what we consider romantic. Now, while I don't for a second believe that women today are hoping men turn up for dates on horseback waving a sword around, at least I hope not, I do think in heterosexual pairings anyway that we still, even if subtly, rely on acts of masculine initiation and feminine passivity as the yardstick by which we measure the level of romance of any given situation. To illustrate, I'm going to tell you about something I'm not proud of. A feminist fail, shall we call it. So, my partner's birthday happens to fall on Valentine's Day. While I always make an effort to make his birthday more of the focus, we do mix the two events. Last Valentine's, as usual, I had planned the whole day, bought tickets for a movie, booked a nice restaurant. However, when it came time to pay for the meal, I did make the automatic assumption that he would be paying. My only reason being that it was Valentine's Day, and where was the romance in that? Of course, his face fell, and he reminded me that it was his birthday, which broke my heart. I immediately felt horrible, not only because, at least in our family, you shouldn't have to pay for your own birthday meal out, but also, the more I thought about it, did he not deserve some romance? Did he not deserve to be swept off his feet by a heroic woman in shiny armour? At that moment, I had simply followed the script, been carried off on its potent tide, slipping into a gendered mode of thought on autopilot. It was a role I felt comfortable in, where I knew all my lines, but realised I didn't agree with what I was saying. Surely I could and should rise to the occasion too. But how did this version of love, this conflation of passivity and romance, find its way from medieval France to 8-year-old Illy growing up in North London in the 1990s? Well, let's take a moment and revisit those Arthurian legends I grew up reading. We might think of them as ancient tales penned by candlelight, in manuscripts illustrated by cloistered monks and then faithfully passed down to us from generation to generation. But the versions I was reading as a child were not the original legends penned in the 5th century, nor even those of the popular bodice rippers of the 13th. What I was reading was devised much later, in the late 18th to 19th century. During this time, the Arthurian legends underwent a bit of a revival. In the Age of Enlightenment, they were revisited and reimagined by the Romantic poets, writers and artists as a way of conjuring up a simpler, more noble time. Nature and its perceived feminine qualities were exalted, passion and emotional expression trumping the heartless reason and industrialism of the day. Sadly, this did very little to elevate the status of actual women, and of course, what was considered feminine was not often judged by women themselves. And when it came to what Georgian young women were actually permitted to read, these tales were purposefully sanitized. In Arthuriana for the Fair Sex, Gender Politics and the Reception of Romance, Garner sets out how between 1770 and 1850, many female writers shaped their responses to these popular old stories through gendered patterns of access. The tales had to be cleaned up and deliver clear moral instruction for the young ladies that read the Ladies' Magazine or Entertaining Companion for the Fair Sex. In Radagunda Roberts' The Female History, published in 1775, Guinevere was no longer the bit character of old or a manipulating temptress. She was a virtuous Guinevere that reflected the kind of woman these magazines approved of, or, as Garner puts it, no more than an object passed between two men. Of course, society most often feels the need to double down on traditional gender roles when it feels they are being threatened. With the French Revolution and the American War of Independence as a backdrop, this moralizing of romance for an audience of young women and girls happened to coincide with when women were advocating for their rights more than ever, as part of the wider discussions on individual liberties. With the likes of Mary Wollstonecraft in the dedication of A Vindication of the Rights of Women, published 1789, arguing, "Who made man the exclusive judge if women partake with him the gift of reason?" She was talking in particular about the illogical injustice of men debating and deciding key aspects of women's lives, like education, in their best interest, which the example of the revised Arthurian tales illustrates nicely. Especially when you consider that while these magazines often employed female writers, the owner, editor and publisher were all men, and while they often contained many of the same stories as their male-targeted publications, they left out political items on purpose, or altered them to, in their minds, stop women panicking and causing a disturbance in the domestic sphere. It's fascinating to think that when I sent my father off on that quest, my version of romance in the late 90s had to some extent been shaped by and for a Georgian morality. The interplay of initiative on one side and passivity on the other, glamorized and passed down to us as the pinnacle of romance. So we find ourselves in the present, clinging on to a mode of relating that's by no means perfect, but that we've gotten comfortable working with. However, for those surface gains, especially when it comes to proposals, you may be sacrificing more than you think in the name of romance. After all, passivity is a double-edged sword. Let's revisit that script again, but this time let's imagine it from the proposee's point of view. Firstly, involving yourself in any way negates the test. If you pick the restaurant, go halves on the ring, it's not much of a test for them, is it? How can you prove that you're worthy of this special attention if you've organised it all yourself? How can you test if they really love you if it was your idea in the first place?
Hi.
Oh, great, you're here.
So, I thought I'd kill that...
Dragon? Absolutely. I've been planning this for years. I know just how to do it, maps, swords, weaknesses.
Oh, right.
Secondly, if the proposer takes on all the responsibility, they also wield all the power. The where, when, how, and most importantly the if is not up to you. If you want it to be romantic according to the script, you have to wait until your partner decides to move your relationship forward, Whether you're ready or not, it's out of your hands. So, do we have a time frame for this thing?
Well, I don't know. I'm pretty busy this week.
Okay, it's just I've kind of been knocking around this castle a while, ready to get out there, if you know what I mean.
Right. It's just, between the crusade and the witch burning, never feels like the right time, you know?
Uh-huh.
Maybe next year?
Okay. And lastly, the proposer's worthiness is determined through their own actions, which they control, whereas your worth as the chosen party is determined solely through what someone else is willing to do for you, framing you as a prize rather than as an equal actor, which puts you in a vulnerable position. Imagine your partner proposing on top of the Eiffel Tower or in the place you first met. Now imagine them proposing in a public bathroom or on a casual Sunday trip to the rubbish dump. How would the second example make you feel about yourself? Regardless of the relationship to date, the proposal has come to be a reflection of you and your partnership. Which is why, if executed badly, a proposal has the power to throw your whole relationship into question. If you'd like to see an example of what this looks like, I highly recommend you Google "girlfriend proposal gone wrong Ealing McDonald's." I know it's a prank, but the feelings I'm sure were very real. This can all add up to a difficult situation for the proposee. If you're ready to get married but you want a proposal that sticks closely to the romantic script, it takes a lot of control over a major life decision out of your hands, and puts a lot of pressure on the proposer to interpret your desires and deliver, to pass the test, potentially creating a very uneven power dynamic in the process. It surprises me, but I still hear about women my age who've been ready to get married for years but are waiting for their partner to pop the question, all because the more you deviate from the script, the less, according to society, romantic the whole thing becomes. Intriguingly, the middle-class, educated women in Lamont's study had a workaround for this. Only 3 women ended up waiting it out. The majority, empowered by successful careers, arranged their engagement on mutually agreed timetables, which they extensively discussed beforehand. However, in a remarkable twist, after making the decision to get married, the man was still expected to surprise the woman with a proposal. Crochelle from earlier is a good example of this. She designed her own engagement ring, yet still wanted her partner to surprise her with it on holiday. As Lamont argues, this desirable element of surprise allowed women to preserve the narrative of the male-initiated proposal, cementing their own chosen statuses while protecting their inclusion in the decision-making process. In the study, even the women who strongly asserted timetables and ultimatums, around a quarter, expressed fears of negative reactions and went to great lengths to preserve the illusion of surprise. However, as women continue to claim their equality in all spheres of life, the boundaries of this romantic script will necessarily be tested, and that enticing illusion harder to upkeep. If you're in a position like Mary, for example, and your significant other can't afford to buy the engagement ring of your dreams, would it be so wrong if you bought it for yourself? While many of us might pay lip service to that idea, we can imagine in practice what some of Mary's colleagues or the media might make of that, the pressure of which is a powerful deterrent. And if you're a woman proposing to a man, it can unravel the fantasy for those around you even further, and as I discovered, has a way of pushing back. Not long after I proposed to my partner, family began asking when I would be getting a ring. People just assumed I would, like the one I bought and had engraved for him was just a warm-up act to the main event. And I can't blame anyone, because I got sucked into it too. I found myself Googling engagement rings, making Pinterest boards and going back and forth about it in my head. The idea of having that physical and expensive symbol of love and devotion on my finger is really tempting. I would feel loved. I would feel wanted. And what I'm essentially asking myself to do here is get my sense of romance not from the receiving, but the giving this time, which in this well-trod symbolic act has honestly felt a little awkward and strange at first. Like walking on stage and realizing you're in the wrong costume and reading the wrong lines. So, should we stick with preserving an illusion, or try creating a new reality? As we've been discussing this episode, I think one of the reasons we women find ourselves holding back is because we think it'll ruin the fantasy of being chosen. However, when we cling to this old script of romance so tightly, I would argue, perhaps we are simply limiting what romance could be, especially when it comes to the engagement ritual itself. It is, after all, supposed to be symbolic of our relationships. Yet the romantic script ignores many positive relationship traits that we say we value, such as teamwork and open communication. And I wonder, wouldn't it be interesting to reimagine the proposal act altogether, in a way that better represents those ideals? Now, before we all panic, am I saying we should chuck it all away, put all our swords and wimples in the bin? Well, to that I would say, there's no need to chuck the dragon out with the moat water. Taking turns to lavish care on one another and performing acts of service can be beautiful and sexy. Some would even say it's the cornerstone of a healthy relationship. The rhythm of passivity and assertiveness is not inherently bad after all. It's only a problem when we hold it up as the one and only idealized version of love, shaped by people and times other than our own, and we stay rigid to the idea of who can do what. Ultimately, I believe everyone should have the opportunity to express themselves as either the chooser or the chosen, the proposer or the proposee. But based on the trends, at least in the UK and the US, that we discussed last episode, we obviously haven't quite got there yet, at least culturally speaking. So my proposal would be this. Before we go on our next date, or discuss getting engaged with our partner, for us all to take a step back and really investigate our own narratives around romance, without judgment, acknowledging where those beliefs came from and who they serve, to be curious and discover what other versions of romance might be available to us. Ones where perhaps women can be the heroic knights and men the distressed gallants once in a while. And then, with our new scripts in hand, we should act on them and resist returning time and again to old patterns out of comfort or fear, even if going off script might call for a little bit of improv. Next episode, we'll be venturing into the past, seeking the long view on engagements, divorcing fact from fiction, ancient rite from business transaction. If you or anyone you know has a relevant story or thoughts they'd like to share about modern dating and feminism today, or you just want to send me a cute cat video, please get in touch at tyingknotspod@gmail.com, and links to sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. So, I think releasing an episode once a week was a little ambitious on my part. The recording got all wonky, so I had to redo this episode, and then it was my birthday, so I fell behind pretty quick. I'm going to switch to releasing once a month. Hopefully that will give me enough time to keep doing a better and better job of this. In the meantime, a big thank you for listening, and if you found this episode of Tying Knots enjoyable or valuable, please leave us a 5-star review, subscribe and share with your nearest and dearest, or someone you have great esteem for, but it just never quite clicks. You have no idea why. See you next time.